LinkedIn is pretty amazing at helping you grow your small business. We cannot stop your new clients from emailing you at 3 a.m. We can help you sell, market, and hire in one place. We cannot help you be in 3 places at once. And while we can't help you organize your calendar, LinkedIn can help you land more clients so you have a calendar to organize. Grow your small business on LinkedIn. Learn more at linkedin.com/smallbusiness.
Morning decisions. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Hello, difference makers. You are listening to A World of Difference. This is a podcast for the people who still believe that how we lead matters, that the conversations we have across difference, across cultures, across the distance between where we are and where the world needs to go can actually change things. I am Lori Adams Brown, and for over 5 years, I have been bringing global leaders, authors, and change makers to one table. 155,000 downloads, 800 countries, a top 3% podcast, and one conviction that has not changed. The right conversation at the right time with the right people shifts everything. If you are here, you are already a difference maker. And if you want to go deeper, the Difference Makers community is waiting for you at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. $7 a month, the price of a latte, bonus conversations, voting power, and a seat at the table where this conversation continues. The link is in the show notes. And welcome to this week's episode. I hope it inspires you. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Welcome back to A World of Difference, the podcast for globally minded leaders who believe that difference isn't a liability, it's a superpower. I'm your host, Lori Adams Brown, strategic transformation executive, founder of Bravo Global Advisory, and deeply committed believer that your voice matters and that you are not alone in whatever leadership challenge you're navigating right now. Today, I have a guest who stopped me in my tracks. She's an author and entrepreneur who combines creative insight with strategic expertise. And her latest book goes straight to the heart of something so many high-achieving leaders experience but rarely say out loud. Sally J. Clarke is the recipient of the 2025 Inc. Prize for her debut fiction novel, Ringside Gamble, and a co-author of Walk Away, Step Out to Step Up. She has led global strategic marketing, communications, and partnerships over a 15-year period at SunGard, now FIS and Markit. She's directed advisory engagements for Mitsubishi, Accenture, and the Singapore Stock Exchange, and she holds master's degrees from the University of Barcelona and the University of London. Sally is in Singapore at the moment, which you know has a special place in my heart after having lived there 10 years. So I'm really excited to welcome to the show today, Sally J. Clarke. Sally Clarke, welcome to A World of Difference from all the way in Singapore. It's so lovely to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Lori, for having me here.
Well, I'm really excited to dig into your thought leadership, and I would love for us to just start at the beginning, because I think that the origin story of an idea often really tells us everything. And your work really exposes how leaders sustain their ability to contribute and lead over time. What first made you question the idea that staying the course is always the right decision?
So why I first started questioning about staying the course is the right decision was a reflection on conversations with business leaders across the world, and really hearing from entrepreneurs about the amazing accomplishments that they had achieved, and really what caused them to pivot in the first place.
It's true. There's so many varied reasons for career pivots and walking out the door or being shown the door, ousting. There's just a plethora of, actually a lot being written about that at this moment because there's so much transition happening in the workplace. But that reframe, I would say staying isn't always strength is something I've kind of seen that you're kind of speaking about. And it sometimes feels countercultural in so many organizational environments. And so I guess that opens up such a specific conversation about some of the signals. So when you think about patterns that you write about in Walk Away, it's one I find so recognizable. The high performer who stays too long, Performance is still strong, credibility is still intact, but something is quietly shifted for them. And so, what are the signs that someone's environment has changed around them, even when their results haven't?
So, first of all, why does walk away, step out to step up exist as a book? And it's because when Deborah Owudepoot and I was in Singapore, she was here on business, and I worked with Deborah at SunGard, which became FIS. It's a global financial technology firm with over 26,000 employees. We talked about how much the narrative had changed from Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, and why that was no longer relevant in terms of how people are redefining themselves and their career and stepping up and stepping out, and why walking away really is a strategic move. It's not a move that is an emotional reaction. And we thought, oh, if that we think the narrative has changed in our own business experience today as leaders and entrepreneurs, and for myself as well, an author, why don't we go out and sort of find do the qualitative research and discover what is actually happening? And we interviewed over 40 women from diverse cultures and backgrounds across the world to understand what caused them to change course. Why did they decide to stay? Why did they decide to walk away? And what were the conditions under which they made those decisions? And importantly, what were the lessons learned?
Yes, I remember being in Singapore and reading Sheryl Sandberg's book. And now I'm in Silicon Valley, which is where she was working and starting this whole movement. And so much has shifted. And we've learned so much about what did and didn't work, even with what she wrote. And what I love about what you're saying is that it moves the diagnostic really kind of off the person and onto the conditions, which I think is a really important part of the conversation. It's a different starting place, actually. And, that matters, especially when we talk about roles that look right from the outside, but aren't so right from the inside. And because you write about a different scenario, leaders in roles that signal success by every external measure, the title, the compensation, the trajectory, but internally the role has stopped fitting. The question I have for you is, how do leaders recognize when a role has become strategically wrong for them, even when everything on paper says to stay?
There are many factors in that you recognize when is the right time to move, and that there may be a misalignment that you feel that you're not a good cultural fit. It may be a mispromotion. It may be a change in your own circumstance, as a woman or a father having children. And that may change your life goals, and the work environment no longer meets what you want to do. You may have an entrepreneurial mindset where you think, you know what, I've seen a gap in the market. I've seen a big, hairy, audacious goal that I want to go out and build towards. I want to build that. And it's an exciting opportunity to do so. So if we take, for example, Dr. Meena Kaushik, whose chapter appears in the book, she talks about a time when, as an anthropologist, she was very interested in doing qualitative research. And she joined a company, a market research company, and she was told, even though she was on the position of the board position, this is when she's from India, that really, why did she need a company car when her husband had one? She couldn't possibly lead a division of the company, because qualitative research is not proper data, and that she didn't have an MBA. So she took this points on board, and today the company that she's running is present in seven countries worldwide. She has a unique operating system for how she runs her company culture. It's called the Hive. And this Hive infrastructure enables people in London to act in a way that's creatively different to people in her office in Singapore, because that her company structure l- really reflects the learnings that she took away from when she was at our previous employer.
That's incredible, because sometimes the system is so rigid, you must do it differently from the outside and show that it can be done. And she has certainly done that. And many of us who've worked globally as expats, like you and I, and or who have grown up as third culture kids, or who have immigrated, or even just moved within the same very large country and seen how things can work differently in a different culture, both a work culture and a societal culture, we realize that we have to differentiate how we work if we want to get the best outcomes. And sounds like she's done that quite well. But sometimes this concept of something being strategically wrong, there's a lot to unpack there because it removes emotion and it makes it really a leadership decision, not so much a personal failure. And I think especially some of the conversation around women, because of how every culture has various versions of how we view women, and it's so nuanced. But many cultures have different understandings of what women are allowed or expected to do in terms of how work works out for them in many workplaces. And globally, we're made by men for men. And so we're still all these years later sort of trying to tweak that. So I think we see it especially with women who leave roles. It can be somewhat shameful. And the way we word it really matters in terms of not being a personal failure. The expectations on women being so much around being perfect and never getting anything exactly wrong. And the rules are kind of unwritten. But I think that when we really remove it from that emotion and make it a leadership decision that's very strategic, it's less of a personal failure and more of a choice. And I think that connects directly to the timing of also what you're talking about, because this might be really kind of the most counterintuitive idea that you're speaking about in your book for me. And I suspect for a lot of our listeners, you write about leaders who choose to walk away before burnout, before crisis, and before anything visibly broke. So why do we often wait for things to actually break before we give ourselves permission to leave? And what does it look like to make that call before the breaking point itself?
It's an interesting one. Simona addresses it in her story. She talks about embracing fear. We're hardwired as human beings to not to like the status quo. And anyone who's trying to transform an organization knows this very well. You get huge pushback about new tech, new ways of working. Transformation is really, really difficult. And on a personal level, it's really, really difficult. It's like, how do you embrace? If you understand that if you're slightly fearful, it's because you're probably in a learning space. And Simona, who went from East Germany and worked away, she was at Lehman, she worked away through the financial crisis of 2008 and up to the sort of board level in Germany at State Street Bank, which is a systemically important bank. She talks about how she understands that she should always be learning and earning, right? And if you're not doing both, there's a misalignment. And how she pushes her own team to embrace uncertainty because it means that learning and you shouldn't be too comfortable. Maybe it's fine that you're too comfortable because your situation where you are in your life, your personal circumstances means that that's where you want to be. But if you want to go out and your career vision, if your personal career vision is that you want to solve a big world problem, there's going to be some uncomfort along that path. If your career journey is that you want a hobby business, if your career journey is that you are happy because of your life circumstances or because your own personal preferences, that you want to stay in a given situation, that's fine too. The book and the learnings from the book are it's not telling you what to do. It's saying, these are 16 leaders. These are people who have faced conflicts, they've faced challenges, they've faced difficult situations. And here's how they went about solving them. And here are the lessons learned.
The power of story is incredible, which is one of the reasons I love podcasting and interview podcasting specifically, because we learn so much from each other's stories and it gives us insights into our own lives and what we're living through, especially in our careers. And so, but I think that permission question is something I hear from leaders all over the world, this sense that they need an external reason, justification before they're allowed to act on what they already know within themselves. And I wonder if part of if a part of what is happening internally is sort of these misaligned environments, because you draw a really important distinction in Walk Away between what looks like a coincidence issue and what's actually a structural one. So, how does being in the wrong environment affect the way leaders think and decide? And why is that so often misread as a personal limitation?
So let's think about Alice Chen's story. She was working in Wall Street. She was working for a huge Wall Street law firm, and her her line manager, she boasted about the fact that she went straight back to work after 2 weeks after giving birth, as it was a gold medal. I did it. I'm back. I'm working. I've been here, 2 weeks. I'm here. The Alice had challenges working with that boss, who would scream at people across the office floor. People didn't want to work with her. She had huge challenges getting associates. And Alice at that time, she lent in to trying to fit that culture. And it was only later in life that she realized and acted with empathy towards that line manager, understanding that the reason why this woman behaved in this way was because the culture demanded it. However, at that time, Alice really lent into it. She worked all the hours sent and kept pushing forwards to the point where she was ill. And it was only when she had a near-death experience in the hospital bed that she realized that she had to walk away. Her body was saying, enough, enough. And today, Alice is leading Investec. She's a co-founder, co-counsel, and has an amazing career building out a business. And the lesson she learned from that time at the Wall Street law firm is that she leads with empathy. She leads with a sense of kindness, and she's learned that how you run your own company, you don't want to repeat the mistakes that you saw when you were working in that culture and what it did to people. So she's a highly respected, award-winning business leader because of that. And similarly, other people have the same stories in terms of this is what we experience. And perhaps it's a learning curve that happens. It's because of our own values, our own integrity, and our own honesty that we see that happening. And it makes us stronger as part of the process of when we go and become founders ourselves or whatever we decide to do.
It's so true. And that reframe is incredibly important, especially for leaders who've been told implicitly or explicitly that they just need to work harder on themselves and do what is really humanly atypical, not normal in terms of if we're really thinking about it, that no woman should be back to work 2 weeks after giving birth. I mean, the US is extreme as far as developed nations because we are very shameful about our maternity leave here. And after living in Singapore and in other countries where it's so much more humane, it's much more it takes into account how half the world's bodies actually work and how this is normal. We have AI, we have all these changes, but the reality is the human body and the recovery period from giving birth it's a period of time, and bouncing back isn't really a thing. It does take time to recover from that. And if you want the best out of your leaders, you would consider their human limits, which we do have them. And it's really important that we lead increasingly in these ways, especially with how technology is increasingly giving us the opportunity to be less human, but also giving us the opportunity to make the human decisions. And I think that really is one of the cruxes of leadership right now. But this reframe is so important. Let's talk about what actually happens, though, when they do make that decision. So you described something in the research that I find genuinely hopeful, actually, the speed at which clarity and impact return for leaders who move into better fit environments. What does that typically look like? And what did the research tell you about how quickly people recover, or more accurately, return to themselves?
First of all, the walking away is a strategic. It's a strategic exit in terms of thinking what's right for me. And one of the leaders, it's not actually in the book, but she described how she has a scorecard approach and how she wrote down a list thinking what fills my cup. And writing the 10 things that actually make her happy in terms of, do I like doing sales? Do I like doing this? Do I like, and then the next column in that is a column that she gives a percentage point to. So what percentage of my time do I want to spend on this goal, on this activity, or on this activity? And from that, she then has directed her career forwards. And it's a good way of thinking about how you're developing your career, and also how you have, what vision are you actually building towards? I've had I'm so gratitude to the mentors I've had in my life. I'm Lance Ugler, who was the founder and CEO of FIS Markit, that he went on to sell to Standard & Poor's for 44 billion. So a big number there. He when he mentors people, he says to them, well, if you think of only going forwards 3 steps, you're only going to go forwards 3 steps. Why not have a vision, a big goal of where you're going to get to? And this is what you see in these stories about, they have a goal. They have they take all the lessons they've learned, they put them up in their rucksack, and they combine that with their vision of where they're wanting to get to. And there is certain human traits that you recognize across the stories. Resilience is a huge one. And moving forwards towards your goal doesn't actually mean you're in a linear progression. It's very often it's sidestepping. You can sidestep while you continue learning and earning as you go forwards to what you're wanting to achieve. It's not a straight line.
Yes. What came to mind is I live in Northern California, and if you've been to Yosemite or watched any of the documentaries about the rock climbers, there's one called the Dawn Wall. There's a famous guy around here. His name's Alex, and he's featured in a couple different documentaries. Just Free Solo was one of them. And when they climb like El Cap, which is a very flat looking surface, sometimes you're not just going straight up, you're sidestepping to make progress to go up. And that was the image that came to mind when you said that. We sometimes believe that you have to just keep climbing this corporate ladder. But some of this younger generation, in particular, Gen Z, is not necessarily buying into that. And it's probably better that we rethink it anyway, have pathways or whatever that looks like for people, because it's not the same and it should be individualized. Absolutely. But I love that framing where you talk about kind of returning to themselves. It suggests that there's this capability that was never really gone, and it was just, waiting for the right conditions. So, Sally, you've worked across Singapore, London, New York, globally distributed teams and cultures. So I want to go there with you for a moment. We are people all around the world listening and have moved, a lot of us, to multiple countries and or traveled for business as well. So because the cultural context around leaving, it's not really neutral. So, in many organizational cultures, particularly across Asia, the Middle East, parts of Latin America, where I grew up, there's a deep social weight attached to loyalty, to tenure as well, and even to visible commitment to an institution. So how does culture shape a leader's ability to recognize misalignment and to act on it? And do you see meaningful differences in the stories you gathered from different parts of the world with that?
Absolutely. Only the other day I was speaking to a woman she has a new boss coming in who is Chinese, and the Chinese culture arguably has more of a hierarchical system in terms of alignment around the goals of the leader. Her culture very different. I came from the UK, expected to be vocal, expected to be saying what you think, make yourself heard, and critique. Critique in terms of adding value and pointing out flaws with what leaders say. And there was a lack of alignment, shall we say, in terms of the two different ways of being. And it's very difficult to deny who you are. For me, for example, for myself, I know that I am a verb, I'm not a noun. I like doing things. I like building things. I like creating things. And that is part of my DNA. I'm not one that is like, I'm a noun, I am a job title. No, there's more to life for me than just being a job title. I want to be involved I want to have a portfolio career. That's what works best for me. Culturally, if we extrapolate from there, it is also important to understand yourself and what works best for you. Do you want to be in an environment, wherever you are in the world, where you need to adjust overly or to fit in? And what does fitting in actually mean? And if you fitting into somewhere, I mean, if you're a zebra, you're not going to fit into in a pride of lions. You're just not going to work well there. you got you got you got to recognize. And equally, if you're a lion, don't go with the zebra. It's because you're going to eat loads of grass and you're going to starve. So you got to know who your tribe are.
It's very well said. That global texture is something I don't think gets enough airtime in leadership conversations, and I'm really grateful that you went there, because I believe that in a world such as the one we're living in, too much of it is still trying to put us in these boxes and make us the same and make us um, to fit into it at the wrong level, and not bring out our differentiators. And there is one aspect of learning the work culture, learning the societal culture that you're living in, if you have shifted in that. And there is a certain level of assimilation that I think is somewhat expected and is good. But then there's a certain level of assimilation that is not good for that work culture itself, or for you as a leader, you as an individual. And so I'm really glad that you brought out that specific story, because I can imagine it. I lived in
But
Singapore.
Hari, just to interject, there are
Yeah,
some qualities that are not a lot that add benefit to wherever you are in the world, such as do what you say you're going to do. If you
yes,
say you're going to achieve a sales number, achieve that sales number. If you
exactly.
say to your company shareholders, we're going to make this, we're going to achieve this target this quarter, achieve that target. That was it. If you're saying to people you are going to have a meeting, or your direct reports, that you are going to do one-to-ones, or you're going to do skip meetings, or whatever it is, do them.
Yeah, I mean, some of that is just integrity, and
Yeah.
that crosses all cultures. People just appreciate honesty, and I think there's these fundamental leadership core capabilities that really do transcend cultures. And then the nuance of how it's expressed is can be quite different. But I agree. I think that honesty is something that is across all cultures that we should all value. And I'm really grateful we could go there. I want to ask you about the creative dimension of your work, because you didn't just write a leadership book, and everything you've just described, leaders who sense misalignment before anyone else names it, environments that shift beneath people while performance holds. I really want to connect that to something, happening now, at a cultural and political level, that I think is really deeply relevant to our listeners. And as everything you've just described, leaders who sense this misalignment before anyone else names it, um, it really can be quite disorienting. Sometimes, though, walking away doesn't feel as much like a choice because of the geopolitical shifts or circumstances. But we're recording this, in a moment when some of the most powerful men here where I live in Silicon Valley and tech are saying things publicly that many workforces around the world may have paid attention to, because a lot of this global enterprise that comes out of Silicon Valley is also in Singapore and London and various places. And so, sometimes it feels as though the quiet part is being said out loud, and therefore we have an opportunity to reckon with that. So last year, it was, I think, around January 2025, when Meta's CEO here in Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg, he was on a podcast with Joe Rogan, and he made a statement I think a lot of our listeners felt in their bones, probably. He said, and I'm just quoting directly, that corporations have become pretty much culturally neutered. And he said, masculine energy, I think, is good, and that corporate culture was really trying to get away from it. And he acknowledged feminine energy. And he said he wanted both, but then then that's when the pivot sort of came, and he said, I do think corporate culture sort of had swung toward being this somewhat more neutered thing, and that a culture that celebrates the aggression a bit more has its own merits. And then a couple of weeks ago, Palantir's CEO here, Alex Karp, told CNBC, and I'm going to read this directly because the words matter, and I want to represent their actual words. It's, this technology disrupts humanity's trained, largely democratic voters and makes the economy powerless and increases the economic power of vocationally trained working class, often male voters. And he said AI will undermine the influence, again, his words, of highly educated, often female voters. We don't have to get into the American political side of it, but obviously there are implications of voting globally and ways that we know Meta has been involved, right or wrong, and that Palantir with their data collection and healthcare and various areas have been somewhat involved in certain things that cause us to question. So my question for you: these aren't hypothetical concerns. The data is already here, and we've seen many women ousted or having to walk away, as your book describes, in global enterprise. And I guess my question for you is, what does walk away mean in light of Mark Zuckerberg's quote and the Palantir CEO's quote, and what you're seeing in terms of women and how they're being given, in some cases, maybe a choiceless choice about walking away?
Well, first of all, why would anyone say that? Yeah. Why would you, as a CEO, misalign a huge chunk of your workforce? What are you seeking to achieve? Why? I mean, what's the upside? Why would you do it? That is my gut reaction as to it just doesn't make any business sense, right? It just doesn't. It doesn't. So they're actively misaligning their employees, their employees' values, their contribution and their right to belong. And that's the first question. And, we learn a lot by standing in people's shoes. We learn an awful lot by doing that. And standing in the shoes of women, and just a moment, if we can both do that, Laurie, we would immediately question, do I belong? And I would hypothesize pretty quickly, we would decide that we did not. And, because it's not individualistically telling people you need to leave. It's saying there's a huge culture shift going on in our companies, that this is a direction that we believe we should be heading in. And again, I go back to the why as to why you do that. I've had the honor of working with CEOs and I've laughed with them and I've said to them, in communications, you're the chief repetition officer. You're not actually, that's part of your job. As a chief repetition officer, you go around the building and you say, it's great. We are all going towards one direction and it's amazing and it's exciting and we're going to achieve this. This is what we're going to achieve all together, the team. That's what great leaders do. What they don't do is say what these leaders have said.
Yeah, it doesn't make any business sense, and yet it's being said. And so that's, I think, why we see some women walking away, because they've, in my anecdotal experience over the last year plus since that comment was made in January 2025, there have been a series of things that have happened here in Silicon Valley where I've seen many, many women go out the door for those reasons. They suddenly didn't belong. And so, hopefully there are people out there who are, as they leave, either finding new places of belonging where they really can contribute it and they really are taken seriously in business, or being entrepreneurial, as your research shows, and starting new things. But I want to think about the leader right now who's listening to this and who's sitting in that uncomfortable middle space, not at a crisis point, but maybe quietly sensing that something really is off. What's one question they can ask themselves this week to really begin to get honest about whether their environment is still serving their leadership?
I would go back to that question of vision, strategy. What does success look like for you? And it's an interesting. I mean, as you know, I've worked on the art side, and I've also worked, art history, and on the other side, financial mathematics. Very two different influences on how I think about, well, and for an artist, there's the education you get very early on. Professor Albert Irvine, when he taught at Goldsmiths College in London, he would say to his class, before you do anything as an artist, first of all, you got to check in with yourself. You really want to be an artist because it's hard and it's difficult. If you can go and do anything else, do it. But you have to work out with art, what do you want to say to the rest of the world before you even pick up a paintbrush or a digital tool or however you execute your art, right? You have to really think that. And if you just want to make things, that's fine. Like a hobby business, it's fine. You craft, you produce. But if you want to really have a big vision or a goal, you've got to think about, what is the problem I'm solving? What human element am I really dealing with here? And what I really intrinsically want to say about the world, right? Similarly, if you want to go down the entrepreneurial path, you've got to solve a big problem. You've got to solve water scarcity. You've got to solve something with climate tech, biotech. You've got to solve a big problem. Equally, if you want to have a hobby business, that's fine too. But it's important to check in with yourself. Really, really important to know where you want to get to and what is the end state that you're working towards. And it must be a rational choice. And what was interesting about in many of the interviews is that no one left emotionally. The people in the book, when they're describing their careers, it was a strategic decision to move on. And that's a key takeaway from across the story, is that it's a strategic decision of knowing where you're walking towards. And it's not a straight career ladder, the ladder goes in different directions. But it is that you have to have an idea of where you're moving towards.
It's such a good observation, and it definitely checks out in terms of the women I know that have walked out over the last year and a half. It was not at all emotional. It was very values aligned, knowing who they were, and some clear lines in the sand that were drawn in front of them. Then they had a choice to make. And so I think that it's really wonderful that you've been able to capture these stories and for us to learn from in this time when we really do need to hear one another's stories to help us understand who we are in light of that and what we stand for and what we want our work to speak about. And so before we get to our final question, I want our listeners to be able to know everything they need to know in terms of how to find you and your book. So where can people find Walk Away, Step Out, or To Step Up? And where can they also follow your work?
So absolutely. Thanks so much for that. So Walk Away, Step Out, Step Up was written co-authored with Deborah Overdeput. I want to give it a shout out to her. And it's found on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all good online bookstores. And for myself, you could follow me or discover more about me at my author website, sjclarkeauthor.com.
Wonderful. Well, after we finish this recording, I'll record it with you on our Difference Makers community on Patreon. So everybody, if you're not there yet, it's patreon.com/aworldofdifference. And I'm going to spend some time just in this one other question with you, digging a little more into some more personal aspects of what this book was for you in terms of what you discovered through the lens of these different stories. So we'll go a little bit deeper there with our difference makers. But thank you so much for sharing your research, your book, your learnings with us today. It's so important as we see leadership changing, as we see things happening out of the mouths of CEOs and also just maybe in the town hall in the global enterprise where listeners might be working right now and hearing some of those changes. Or maybe it's a conversation you recently had with your manager. And hopefully this conversation with you, Sally, has been something that's opened up the eyes of our difference makers as they begin to question for themselves, am I still in the place that's right for me and my leadership at this time? So thank you for this framework for them and for this book and all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here on your podcast. Thank you, Laurie.
Okay, difference makers, whether you've walked away, know somebody who's walked away, or are considering walking away, if any part of that conversation landed with you, if you recognize yourself in those stories of high performers and slowly shifting environments, I want you to sit with that recognition. Don't diagnose it as a you problem before you ask if it's a fit problem. That question alone could change everything. Now, here's what I need from you. 3 things. 1, subscribe to A World of Difference right now, wherever you listen. We're dropping conversations like this one regularly, and you don't want to miss what's coming up next. Also, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review, it takes 2 minutes and it's genuinely how one of the most powerful things you can do to show this show to other leaders and to give us the reach that we need to reach those who want to have these conversations with us. You can leave us a review at aworldoftdifferencepodcast.com/reviews/new, and that link will be in the show notes. Share this episode with 5 people in your network, 5 people who are navigating leadership transition, questioning whether they're in the right environment, or you just need to hear that walking away is sometimes the strongest move in the room. I'm Lori Adams Brown. This has been A World of Difference, and keep making a difference wherever you are. Thank you, difference makers, for being here. Not just for listening, for being the kind of person who shows up for conversations just like this one, because you believe the world gets better when we understand each other more. And that is who difference makers are, and you are one of them. There are 2 ways to go even deeper. On Patreon at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. For $7 a month, you get bonus conversations and community. $25 gets you into the room where the real talk happens, live every quarter with me directly. On Substack, paid subscribers get full essays, no paywall, and a monthly live conversation where I say the things I can't say anywhere else. Links to both of those are in the show notes, and I would love for you to join me in both of those places. If this episode stayed with you, share it with 5 people you know who need this right now. That is how we grow this, and that is how we grow ourselves at the same time. I am Lori Adams Brown. Until next time, difference makers, go keep making a difference.